Okay, here we go. This is Garrett. This video is 1 Peter 4:1. I'm going to read the New Living Translation. That's a modern translation in modern English. That way people in Russia, the Ukraine, Philippines, China who come onto my YouTube channel, we can all read a modern type of English. And this scripture is very simple. There's no need to go to an old English King James Bible for this scripture right here. Let's have a good time. I pray God's going to bless us here. And let's read this. 1 Peter 4:1. Look at what Peter says. Peter says, "So then, since Christ suffered physical pain, he's talking to you and me now, you must arm yourselves with the same attitude he had and be ready to suffer too." Did you hear that? Peter's telling us we better get ready to go through suffering. And how do you think Peter learned that? How do you think Peter learned this Christian doctrine, this spiritual advice, this Christian principle? I'll tell you how. Because Peter had been going through suffering on and off the entire time since Jesus died on the cross. Peter just didn't learn this through direct revelation from God, which he did. He learned it by going through suffering. That's how he learned it. Now let's read it again a little bit slower. Peter says, "So then, since Christ suffered physical pain," so there we have a witness that Jesus went through physical torture. What torture is he talking about? Being beaten, having his beard pulled out. Do you know how much that would hurt to have your beard pulled out of your cheeks? To be spit on, to be slapped, to be hit, to be whipped, beaten with rods, having the crown of thorns on your head, and then having them hammer the thorns into your scalp. Peter's telling us, yes, Jesus suffered physical pain. Don't let anybody tell you he didn't. Don't let anybody tell you the Bible's a lie. We got Peter right here confirming it. Then Peter says, "You." Well, who is you? The chosen ones. He's talking to you. You must arm yourselves. But what does that mean, to arm yourself? That means to get psychologically ready. That means to get emotionally ready. That means to get physically ready. But ready for what? Peter tells you. Peter says, you must arm yourselves with the same attitude Jesus had and be ready to suffer too. Peter's telling you right there, you're going to go through suffering. One of the ways God sanctifies our souls is by having us go through suffering. And let me tell you a secret. This is not just one of the ways God uses. This is one of the main ways. God uses suffering to humble us and to kick the pride out of us and to destroy our ego and to kick out the self-righteousness. He uses suffering, and God is using Peter here in 1 Peter 4:1 to warn you. Peter is warning you. You better arm yourself and get ready to go through suffering, because it's going to come to you most likely for sure. Not every chosen one goes through terrible suffering. Some don't. Some don't, but most do. And God is telling us, speaking through Peter here, that most of you are going to go through suffering. You got to get ready. You got to arm yourself. You got to get your attitude ready to go through suffering. That's what God is telling us through Peter. Now, please be patient and let me read it one last time a little bit differently. Peter says, so then, since Jesus suffered by being beaten and slapped and hit and attacked and having his beard pulled out and being whipped with terrible whips and having thorns put up on his head, etc., etc., children of God, you better get ready to go through the same thing too. You better change your attitude and humble yourself and get ready to go through suffering, because most of you are going to go through suffering like Jesus did, and you want to get the same attitude he had. So Peter says, children of God, be ready to go through suffering. Get ready to go through suffering. You got to get ready now to go through suffering. Change your attitude now and be as much like Christ as you possibly can. And yes, get ready for suffering, because it's one of the main tools God uses to sanctify our souls, to humble us, to cause us to pray more, to be more Christ-like, etc., etc. That's what God is telling us through Peter. And I pray that this scripture is going to bless you. I really, really do. Don't be surprised at the suffering you're going through. This is normal. Peter tells us right here.